I'm Fox 26 meteorologist John Dawson. This is your tropical update. Today is Thursday, 5th of June. We're going to be diving into things, and spoiler alert, right to let you know off the top, the good news from the National Hurricane Center is we're not looking at any tropical formation, any cyclones forming in the Atlantic Basin over the next 7 days. Now, I do have some interesting discussions about all that Saharan dust that we're going to be talking about, but just sort of that bigger picture is that things are still remaining quiet overall in the Atlantic. Now, if you're over in the Pacific side of things, there is a little bit of activity. We could see a tropical depression or a tropical storm forming quite quickly, but for today, we'll be focusing on the Atlantic side of things. And as I mentioned, we're going to have a bit of an in-depth discussion on some of the dust that we're dealing with, that Saharan dust, which is relatively common for this time of the year across the Atlantic Basin. So what we've been watching is an upper level low that the National Hurricane Center was keeping an eye on as the potential, if it were to hang out over the surface of the Atlantic Ocean a little bit too much, it could try to form a bit of a tropical system. But that's not going to be the case, so the Hurricane Center no longer watching this, but we're certainly looking, if you're in the southeastern portions of the U.S., we're certainly looking for some rainy conditions. It's just going to be a non-tropical low that we're dealing with. So just to kind of, again, that reminder as far as the tropical activity that we're used to seeing this time of the year, we are normally fairly quiet. We don't look for a lot of activity overall when we look into June, even through July. Once we get into August, things begin to ramp up. We reach the very peak of tropical cyclone activity, so that means both hurricanes and tropical storms or even depressions. That's September the 10th, and then it'll, of course, drop off as it moves through. It's the 6 months out of the year that we most commonly would see tropical activity. That's what we call hurricane season. It started on June 1st, goes all the way through the end of November. And there are some specific areas that we watch for this activity during different months, and it's just that it's more favored. Historically speaking, this is where we've seen the activity. So I know that things have changed with climate change overall over the years, but historically speaking, this is kind of what we've been kind of looking at. This is based on data from 1944 to 2020 for named storms. So a tropical storm, even a depression, this is the general area where we look for development. And the thing that's a little concerning about that is how close it is to the U.S., right? That's not a lot of time to prepare if something were to form. If something were to form way out in the Atlantic, we have more time to track it. So this is a time of year that we kind of have to keep an eye on things pretty close. And when we look at where hurricanes form in June, we are seeing it right along this eastern edge of the Gulf. That's kind of where we would see the activity happening for a hurricane to be formed this time of the year. And again, that's sort of historically speaking where we've seen the activity and where we would look for it. Now, with the dust that's out there, this is something that's relatively common. What's a little bit less common is to have this dust reach all the way to the Gulf Coast. So if you live along the Gulf Coast, like for us here in Houston area, you're going to see all this dust moving in and impacting our weekend forecast, bringing a lot of haze across the Houston area and the Gulf Coast. And we'll also be bringing the haze, and the lack of rain allows our temperatures also to rise up a little bit. And then we have this next batch that's already kind of prepping itself, already moving off of that African coast. Again, this dust will travel across the Atlantic, and it has impacts on tropical systems as they're trying to form. And we're going to dive into that a little bit, but just see how that continues to make its way into the Gulf and around the area of Florida. And just then we get little breaks in here. When we see these breaks, that's when it's a little bit more likely that something could form. So if we have a weaker system that's trying to form, so if we have something that's not tropical yet, but it's trying to develop, and we have all this dry air, and here are the thunderstorms that are trying to get organized, trying to get that counterclockwise rotation in order to start forming a low at the surface. That dry air gets kind of pulled into the system, and instead of allowing that to energy, those storms to get up and higher into the atmosphere and stronger, it kind of stifles it out a little bit. So those weaker systems like that, it just helps to not even have them form at all. Now, if you already have a large system like a hurricane, and it's already got well-defined ways that it pulls air into it, and then pushes air out of it, inflows and outflows. And if it grabs onto some of that dusty air and brings it in, again, it just makes it more difficult to keep its energy, to keep its strength as it's pulling in that dusty air, and it just sort of begins to give less showers and storms overall. A little bit of history here. I just thought this is a new graphic that's been updated this year. We've been looking at this graphic for a long time, the costliest hurricanes that we've had from 1900, since 1900. Again, this is a dollar figure only. It's not the deadliest. It's not the strongest. It's the costliest. What is the cost? And this has been adjusted to the numbers in 2024. So obviously, Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, but those numbers have been adjusted. If it happened in last year in 2024, it would have been over a $200 billion incident. And so it's very, very costly. That's number one. But the one that we're adding here is Helene. Helene has now jumped its way into the top 10 list from last year, and that is a $78 billion incident with Helene. You'll remember Helene made landfall in the Florida region and then moved up and into the Carolinas and really was devastating. Real quick, I got a couple other things I want to show you. These are some things that have been updated recently. Rainfall from storms. We've been talking about the anniversary of Allison just a little bit, Tropical Storm Allison from 2001, and that brought a lot of rain for the Houston area, but it's not as much, of course, as what we saw in Harvey. So if you look at these states, these storms dropped the most rain, tropical rain that's ever been recorded. So Harvey obviously is the biggest for Texas. In 1940, there was an August hurricane that dropped 37 inches in Louisiana. Jorge's in 1998 dropped a lot in Mississippi. Barry in 2019 was for Arkansas. And then Norma was in 1981 for Oklahoma with over 18 inches of rain. All right, that's going to do it for our tropical update today. Always a quick reminder, if you're on YouTube, you want some more preparation ideas, look up my YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist of my hurricane gear test. When you're on YouTube, you can search for hurricane gear test, or in that search bar, just put in meteorologist John Dawson. We'll have another tropical update for you, of course, coming up tomorrow.